You're listening to a Mango Languages podcast. Language teaching is hard, but there are a lot of reasons to be optimistic. That's why we created this show, Teaching Languages Today, a podcast for world language educators about what's working and what's not. Listen in for the problems fellow teachers are facing, learn what solutions they found, and get some much-needed self-care reminders of why you fell in love with teaching in the first place. Hi, I'm Emily, your host for the show. In each episode, I'll be taking you on a journey into seeing world language ed through a new lens by sitting down with an all-star lineup of teachers, administrators, parents, and students. It's my hope that the stories you hear in this show will get you thinking and feeling different about what you do in the classroom. Hello friends, Emily here. I am so excited for today's episode because I got to sit down with someone very special. This person is not just cool as a human, but she also happens to be ACTFL's 2022 National Language Teacher of the Year. Her name, Heather Sweetser, and she's a senior lecturer of Arabic at the University of New Mexico. She has degrees from The Ohio State University and University of Oregon. Heather's path to becoming an award-winning language teacher is quite an interesting one. It includes enlisting in the U.S. Army, studying at the Defense Language Institute and American University in Cairo, and time spent as a linguist in Syria. I have to admit, I was quite giddy when Heather accepted our invitation to come on the show. What I found most striking about Heather was how she maintains a genuine optimism for the field and profession of world language education, while also being super honest about the professional realities and struggles that we as language teachers face. In this episode, we got to talk about a lot of different things, from the importance of a multi-dialectal approach, the realities of not being a native speaker of the language you teach, and we'll also hear what Heather hopes to see for the future of our field and our profession. So without further ado, here is my conversation with ACTFL's 2022 National Teacher of the Year, Heather Sweetser.
Thank you so much, Heather, for coming on the show. We're delighted to have you.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Heather's story starts in an unsuspecting place. She's 17, just out of high school, and all she knows is that despite what everyone else tells her should be her next step, she doesn't want to go to college, which I know is ironic because now she teaches at a college. This irony is not lost on Heather either. So her story starts somewhere else.
So I was working at a bakery and I loved that job, but it was true in the 90s and it's true today. Very, very hard to make a living on minimum wage. So I was sort of thinking about these things and seeing not a whole lot of future for myself. That's when an Army recruiter called me up out of the blue. Do you want to join the Army? What do you think about the Army? And I was honest. I said, I have never thought about the Army. It was not anywhere on my radar. So I played the flute and had this idea that I would join the military band. There's a military band, we'll pay you to play. But it turns out I'm not a very good flutist. So that was like kind of a dead end. So they're like, well, music and language are closely related. We'll teach you another language. You'll be bilingual. You'll travel the world. All these things that an 8-year-old really wants to hear. So I said, sure, that sounds great. This is where I learned Arabic. It was not chosen by me, I should say. Everybody else I went to basic with all got Korean and not Arabic. So it was, fate or luck or whatever you want to call it, because it's really taken over my entire life at this point.
What is it like to start learning Arabic?
When I started out learning Arabic, it was great. Those first 3 months were great because you make such huge strides in language those first months. You go from nothing to knowing a new alphabet to being able to greet people. And it felt magical. But this quickly turned to the opposite. What I'm trying to think of, whatever the opposite of magical might be, I'm not really sure. So you'd study for 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. You cannot skip class, or it's called desertion, and you get, thrown in prison because it's the military. But a lot of my teachers were not good. People would teach Arabic in ways that didn't make any sense. They would just read out, like we had supposed to have like a reading hour, but they'd read it out loud to us and then translate. So I remember thinking after one particularly frustrating class, I think I could teach this better. And it took me a while to get my Arabic up to the point where I felt like I could. And of course, learning how to teach is a whole nother issue. But Yeah, this was my experience at the Defense Language Institute, and sort of out of spite in some ways, I learned how to teach Arabic many years later.
Okay, spite wasn't the only reason that Heather got into the teaching biz. There was something else that motivated her.
I saw a national security risk, to be honest, with Arabic, because we were taught modern standard Arabic. And then, you start going to Iraq or listening to people speak, and people do not speak in modern standard Arabic. They're speaking in dialects. And so I had no idea what people were saying at all. And even though I was certified as being fluent, whatever fluent means, by the US government, I'm like, I can't even say hello. There's an issue here. I mean, I wouldn't be able to pass the Moroccan DLPT because I've never studied the Moroccan dialect, for instance, but that doesn't mean I don't know Arabic. But maybe they shouldn't then deploy me to Morocco and have me working as an Arabic linguist there, because I don't know the lingua franca there. Or, that doesn't mean I can't learn it or I can't study it first, maybe. But, addressing this linguistic diversity, I think, is a huge important step in, again, national security issues, or just communication and intercultural communication and everything else that goes along with that, because it is not some kind of monoculture from Morocco all the way to Iraq. Just like America is not some kind of monoculture from LA to Kansas to New York. So addressing this issue too, I think, is incredibly important.
Yeah, that brings us to a bigger point, which is dialects in any language, but in Arabic, it's a hot topic right now. Can you help our listeners understand why? Like, if I'm a K-12 admin and I want to create an Arabic program, what do I need to know about these dialects in order to have, an effective program?
This is a great question, and this is open for debate. So I can say my opinion, and somebody else could have their opinion. They could be two different opinions in many ways, and one is not wrong per se, but I think we need to, if we're opening up any program, whether it's K through 12 or higher ed, and I like to say just language learning in general, because I think this divide between K through 12 and higher ed has got to end, because it's all a spectrum.
Insert mic drop.
So I taught at the University of Oregon, and that in this program, Arabic was housed in their religious studies department because they wanted people to be able to read the Quran and Islamic studies. So there, it made sense to teach modern standard Arabic, which comes from classical Arabic and the Quran, because that was the point of that particular program housed in that department. So making that conscious choice, our goal is to do this. And then if you want to learn a dialect, you have to study abroad or something like this, and then a student can choose their own path. This makes sense, but let's address it, not pretend like it doesn't exist. So I had another teacher who would say, the Arabic is the language of paradise. It's God's language. And so if you don't learn it in the here, you're going to be forced to learn it in the hereafter. And you'd better believe God speaks MSA, not any of these dialects. So that was his own particular take on it. And, despite the fact that I'm sure he spoke a dialect at home with his friends and family and that kind of thing. So, we have to have an understanding of this myth that modern standard Arabic is spoken by everybody and understood by everybody. The reality is it's understood by everybody who's educated, who's literate, who's comfortable speaking in this language, and will have the patience to speak to somebody who's learning it. What we're trying to do is give students the ability to communicate. This is our focus, is communication skills, which means you have to know a dialect. So they're not totally different. There's a lot of shared grammatical things. So if I learn Moroccan, for instance, it's going to be a lot easier to pick up on Egyptian, because there are some shared aspects of all of these dialects. So we're trying to train students to, understand what people are saying to them. So, master one dialect, students are going to go wherever they want to, or they have their own personal reasons for learning Arabic, but, recognize the others and learn to handle this linguistic ambiguity instead of, coming across as, yeah, if you learn modern standard, everybody will understand you. Everybody in classrooms will understand you, but that's not the world. And we won't be able to understand movies or, podcasts, or, depending on what kind of podcast it is. Those people are speaking in dialects. And so it's really important to let's deal with this head on. And the other issue too, of course, is that it's not just one homogenous dialect. So Egyptian dialect is not all one dialect. You're going to have different speakers of Arabic, and even in the same building in Cairo, from the person who lives on the bottom floor, the Boab, who's sort of the doorman, to the person in the penthouse on top. And it's just one building, and everybody's somehow speaking different Egyptian dialects. So there's, I think a little bit of a socio-historical issues here too. And the privileged dialects, as it were, the people who are educated, and we need to sort of break these barriers down as well. We can do this as teachers, I think, especially as language teachers, and show people, what, you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to spit out the perfect, verb conjugation or, accidentally misgender somebody because of confusion in language. Like I can still understand what you're saying. You're speaking to me. And that's really what's most important is this communication style.
So next, I went on to ask Heather the question that I had been thinking about ever since we booked her interview. How different can dialects in Arabic be? I mean, is it like the difference between Spanish and Italian, or is it so different that you can barely understand anything? I wanted to know, and I thought you might want to know. So I asked her. Here's what she said.
Oh, that's a good question. It depends on who you're speaking to. And again, this is a political thing, I think. I think it's partly politics why people say, Moroccan speak Arabic and Iraqis speak Arabic and Yemenis speak Arabic and people from the Comoros Islands speak Arabic. But no, Portuguese is a different language than Spanish. I mean, there's politics here that are involved. I was watching Al Jazeera once, and Al Jazeera is a news broadcasting company, and they broadcast in Modern Standard Arabic, as many news broadcasts do, but they were interviewing a Moroccan, and I noticed that the Moroccan Arabic was subtitled into Modern Standard Arabic. I thought that was very interesting. And that made me feel better because I remember thinking, I can't understand this woman, but so can a lot of native Arabic speakers. They're also having trouble. So they felt the need to subtitle it there. As another example too, my husband's from Yemen and we went to go visit his family, and his family lives in a village in North Yemen. And I'd been studying Arabic for 15 years at that point, and I could not understand a word these women were saying to me because men and women even there had different dialects because of the gender segregation. That was, cultural. It wasn't imposed by anybody. It was, a choice made by the people who lived there. And so thank God I had this wonderful woman with me who had been educated in Sana'a, knew Modern Standard Arabic. So she was translating for me from Modern Standard Arabic into the village women's dialect. Because without her, it would have been a struggle.
In a lot of ways, that reminds me of how to an American English ear, right? We might be listening to someone from New Zealand or Australia, and it takes us some processing effort to do that sometimes. So it's not like this is a thing that's special to Arabic, but when you're on the outside looking in and you've never spoken Arabic, it's really hard to get a sense of like, how different can it be? And it sounds like it can be quite different.
It can, because it's more than just accent, because I think a lot of times we confuse accent with dialect. And so, it's a hot topic because then the choice is, okay, there's, hundreds of Arabic dialects. Like by teaching Egyptian, are we privileging this? Then there's the other issue too of, is this dialect not really Arabic? It's not, good Arabic. Whoever gets to decide what good is, So it's a challenge and it's really hard. But I went to a conference a while ago, and because the concern is students are going to get confused with the 80 different ways to say hello, or that means an exaggeration, of course, but it's going to be confusing for students. And what he said was, it's not that students are confused, it's that the teachers are confused. How do we handle this linguistic ambiguity? I mean, we, like you were saying, we do it all the time. In English, it's flat in Britain, but it's, apartment here. Fine. Okay, we got it. It's fine. We can deal with it. But why has it suddenly become this seemingly insurmountable task in another language? It is possible to learn more than one word for the same thing.
I'm a big proponent of speaking hybrid dialects. Like when I teach, because, I teach Spanish and there, so many different dialects.
Yeah.
Yes. And so it can be really frustrating when a student is thinking about language as there's like a prescriptively correct way to do this that the textbook told me. And what I see in my job as being is like showing them that there isn't just that one textbook. There are so many different people that speak this language, and one isn't right, one isn't wrong. And they can be in a place, not understand a word, and they still know Spanish. They just know a different kind of Spanish. And like, I know I don't know if you ever experienced this, but as a non-native speaker of Spanish, I learned the peninsular dialect first. And I went to Spain and spoke peninsular Spanish, and that became my dialect and my accent. And then I went to South America. I was in Ecuador, and I went through this like identity crisis where I was like, I can hear my accent changing, I can feel my dialect changing. Do I need to pick so I sound like a cohesive human? And for a while, I like artificially tried to do that, right? And at some point I was like, no, this just feels fake. And I just allowed myself to mix pieces of the grammar or accents with one another. And now it's just like becomes this beautiful way of speaking that I have now that's, it's idiosyncratic and it's cool. I don't feel bad about it.
That's great. I think something you said really struck me. Like our students come with these, if I may paraphrase, language ideologies of their own, that there is one correct way to say something, because this is what they've been taught largely in their English classes. How do I write a good English sentence, a good English grammar? But I mean, then who gets to decide what good is? When really we need to refocus on, not good and bad, but just dialects. So you have academic dialect of English, which is good to learn how to use, but this privileges certain dialects over others. For me to say, modern standard Arabic, that's the only way to go, because that's the correct dialect. It's just another example of privileging certain classes of people. Who am I to say to my Iraqi heritage student in class that, no, your Arabic's no good? Like that's bad Arabic. I mean, who am I to say this to somebody else? We are so happy to have heritage speakers in our classroom so that our students can have the access to these other dialects, because who knows where life is going to take them.
Okay, so get ready for a shameless plug for the Mango Languages app. There is one feature that I just can't get enough of, which is that we offer in our courses multiple dialects for certain languages. So for example, in Arabic, if you're learning Arabic through Mango Languages, you can choose if you want to learn the Levantine, Iraqi, Egyptian, or modern standard Arabic, which is so cool based on everything that Heather just said. Okay, it's a super cool feature. I love it. Anyways, back to your regularly scheduled program. And get excited because Heather's about to drop a truth bomb.
The interesting thing is that what we're finding is that, we have this idea, it's this dichotomy. It's either dialect or modern standard Arabic. And that's not the case. It's usually a sliding scale, because somebody gets, they have a news interview and they want to be professional, or whatever professional is, or, speak in modern standards that, they sound more educated, but then you get really excited or you start fighting with the people, and then, they'll slip into dialect. Or if even native speakers are doing this, why can't we? This is how language is actually being used. I think it comes down to confusion, because it is easier to teach one way of speaking. And this is how you say hello. And this is how you ask people how they are. And this is how you say what your name is. And if, how do you approach a language then that has multiple ways or multiple entry points, I guess? And I guess the answer is you teach those multiple entry points. But we're still learning how to do this, to be honest. So we were fortunate to win a big grant from Qatar Foundation International, or QFI, who is helping us, by giving us the space to conduct this research on the multi-dialectical approach. There's still a lot of work to be done, I guess you could say. And I don't want to pretend like I have all the answers here. So I'd love to continue this conversation with anybody, because that's how we learn, is, through the exchange of ideas, not just all of us teaching in our own silos and based on our lived experience, what Arabic teaching should be, because that's what they call it, the personal anecdote fallacy. Like, because it was true for me, it's therefore true for everybody.
As an English speaker, what is the hardest part of learning Arabic?
And I think it comes down to language ideologies again, because there's an attitude that Arabic is somehow hard, like so hard, so incomprehensibly hard. The alphabet, you read it right to left, and how could we ever do this? Or any, and just trying to get over this ideology. So, it's not difficult, it's just different. And so this is what I always tell my students. And it's like, it seems hard, but don't give up. It's not as hard as you're sometimes making it out to be. And yes, it can be frustrating. And yes, it does take time. And yes, we do make mistakes, but that's like anything else that's worth learning in this life. If it was easy, everybody would be doing it. And so that's what makes it worthwhile, is this, maybe challenge. And there's some good days and bad days and everything else too. But yeah, it's getting over that hump of feeling like it's impossible or too difficult, or, this, and you hear this, repeatedly from everybody else around you, like, oh, so hard, that kind of thing. It can be really hard to get over that and say, you know what? Yes, I can do this. It's not impossible.
I think I have that ideology, right? Because I haven't learned Arabic, and the idea of like infixes, it does scare me. And I'm a linguist, so I can't even imagine.
The beautiful thing about Arabic, I think, is that there are no exceptions. Like, there's no irregular verbs. The verb tenses are very simple. You learn one verb conjugation, now you have all of the verbs in Arabic. They all conjugate exactly the same. There's no irregularities. There's just more rules, I guess you could say, or explanations for why the language is behaving in such a way. So it's just different, I guess, different ways to approach what can seemingly be difficult.
Do you have a favorite word in Arabic?
Oh, nisnas.
What is that, nisnas?
So the story here is that, back in the day when you didn't know a word, you'd have to look up words in a dictionary. And but then you could see like the words around the word you were looking up. So I stumbled upon this word, and the definition was a magical creature of the forest having only one arm and one leg. Or if you're in Egypt, it means monkey. And I just like couldn't get over this word that I'd found out of nowhere.
So I wonder if that means in Egypt, do they have monkeys with just one arm and one leg?
Right? Like, how did this change?
Okay, I want to shift us into talking about language teaching as a profession. So you already said this, you're not a native speaker of Arabic. Do you ever experience linguistic insecurity as a teacher? I know our listeners have from time to time. And if so, what is your advice for working through that?
Oh, I all the time. I have this issue in the sense that, especially if we have heritage speakers in my classroom, and I set up some debate in class, and then the native speakers start getting into it with each other, and I can't always follow it because I don't know every dialect, and I don't pretend to. Or if I'm watching a movie or listening to music, I have a really hard time with parsing out what's going on in a song. But then I realized, I do this in English all the time. Like they call them mondegreens, right? Like when you think a lyric is saying one thing, but it's really saying another. And we all have this experience, and there's famous ones. But
I didn't know there was a name for that.
Yeah, mondegreen.
And the one that pops into my mind is the Taylor Swift song, Blank Space, where it's
the Starbucks lovers.
Yes. And it's like, we never would have thought that that's what she was saying unless Starbucks existed, right? So you have that lexical bias. Yeah, I love that one.
Or like, excuse me while I kiss this guy instead of the sky. And it's full of like basically the entire song Africa by Toto. I could go on and on about this, but like my confidence in my knowledge of English is shaken when I find out like, Alanis Morissette didn't sing about a cross-eyed baby that you gave to me, which is what I thought it was, I'm not like, oh, I don't know English. I'm like, oh, I just couldn't understand her. But so then why am I like this in Arabic? So I just have to accept this fact that, sometimes I don't know. And that means I ask, I listen more, I go study this at home. Because as a teacher, as any language learner, the learning never stops, or it shouldn't anyways. We can keep improving our own language skills, our own communication skills. And especially language is fluid, it's dynamic, it's constantly changing. So I don't want to teach Arabic of the 90s. We're in a different millennia now. I've got to stay updated as much as I can. And that's okay to not know everything. And it sounds ridiculous. Like, of course it's okay, but languages, we feel this incredible need, like it's fluency or nothing. And fluency means understanding everything all the time. And if we can get away from this particular ideology, I think it'll make us all stronger teachers. And especially, by the way, as non-native teachers, we have a special responsibility to our students to show our students, hey, number one, you too can learn Arabic this well too. And then number two, we understand, I think, the struggles a little bit better sometimes in ways that, native speakers of a language who haven't been trained how to teach can struggle with. So I'll give you a great example of this. I taught English very briefly in Yemen, and I couldn't do it. I was terrible because I just didn't understand. People would ask me questions like, you say, you have plenty of books, but you don't say many of books. You just say many books. Why do you drop that word? And I'm like, I suddenly understood my teachers in Arabic when I'd ask them questions, and they would just say, oh, it's God's will. Like that was their explanation for everything. I wanted to say it's God's will that we don't say many of, because I didn't have an answer. Because as a native speaker, I'd approach English maybe differently. But Arabic, I struggled greatly with Arabic. I'm not one of those people who can pick up languages like some people can. Some people have a knack for it. I do not. So I think, was it you I was talking? I can't remember who I was talking to earlier, but they're like, is there any pitfalls with learning Arabic? And I was like, yes, I can tell you about every single one of them, because by God, I fell into every single one. I've made every possible mistake. But instead of seeing this as a deficit, I see it as a positive, as a strength of the way that I teach, because students feel bad and like, oh, I can't believe I made this mistake. And I'm like, I've made this mistake approximately 8 million times, and I can help you through it. And we all have this experience in English or whatever our native language is too. Like I can't think of that word. What is it? Like one of my friends said the other day, he's like, have you ever been to the Liquid Zoo? I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, oh, wait, okay, not aquarium. I was like, aquarium. Yes, not the liquid.
Honestly, I would give them points for creativity. That's a great description of what it is.
If we embrace this and teach our students to embrace this as well, and I think more and better communication can happen.
Next, I asked Heather how she had been handling things during COVID. Teaching in the pandemic hasn't been easy for anyone. I asked her what has been giving her hope.
I was listening to the teacher of the year of last year of 2021 talking about how much of a failure she's felt like, teaching during COVID, like a lot of her students are not coming to class over Zoom. They're failing, they're doing poorly. And I felt incredibly uplifted by this because I've been feeling the same way. It's been very difficult to teach over COVID. And I'm like, my God in heaven, if the teacher of the year is feeling the same way, then it's okay. And then I felt terrible again. So I'm like, am I just so happy that somebody else is failing? Like, what's going on here? And I was like, no, I'm not happy that she's failing. I'm not happy that other people are doing poorly. That's not the point. I didn't feel alone anymore. And that's what it was about. I'm like, I'm not alone in this, I'm really struggling here. But all of us are really struggling, and our students are too. And this led me down this sort of almost rabbit hole of saying, okay, well, how many students are struggling? And that made me shift my teaching this year to really focus on, my can-do statement for this year is I can make a friend. And we're going to do this in Arabic together, and we're all going to learn and have fun. And because that's really what it's all about. I can communicate, I can meet new people, I can make these friends. We are very privileged as language instructors because we can force students to sit together and have a conversation and make them ask each other, what's your name? And what do you like to do on the weekends? And how was this last weekend for you? Having this sort of interpersonal communication that's been lost, I think, on every level. We don't teach students how to have a conversation. We just put them all in a room and they're all around the same age and we just assume they'll make friends with each other. Some people really need help with this. All of us really need help with this. So this has been for me like the recent win. Like, I come into class and seeing students laughing and talking with each other before class, whereas 4 months ago they were not. They're getting to know each other. Yeah, this has been great to see this year.
Anything that we can do to find some positives is truly beautiful. That brings up, in my mind, study abroad. Obviously, COVID has drastically changed what's possible with study abroad. And you've said that proximity to the Eiffel Tower does not get you fluency. It's the people. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I'd love to. This was another ideology that I used to buy into, this idea that you have to study abroad to become fluent. You need to be immersed. So I went to Syria to study Arabic many, many years ago now. And my Arabic did not improve like I thought it would. Everybody was speaking English to me. We'd get out of class and speak English to each other. It was just basically classroom, but in a different location. Yeah, the conversation isn't somehow more authentic because the Eiffel Tower's in the background. We kind of teach that it is. Or in Arabic, I saw the Sphinx this morning and now I'm perfectly capable of talking about what I did last weekend in perfect past tense. Like that's not at all how it works. You don't have to be in country. It can be immersive no matter where you are, because you can have that experience right here. Wherever right here is for you. And this can help break down barriers too, because there's an assumption that study abroad is possible. For so many, it is not. It is very expensive. It's very cost prohibitive. So we can bring this opportunity to our students really, truly, wherever we are.
Okay, elephant in the room. A lot of schools have had their enrollment numbers in world language education go down.
Yeah.
What do you attribute that to, and what do you see as the possible solution?
This is a huge question, and it's one everybody's talking about. Numbers are declining across the US. And I think this also comes into, language teachers feel guilty, like, am I not doing enough? And I think it's a lack of buy-in in the sense that we're not taught here in the US that a second language is a positive. We see it as a negative. And so if we have like ESL or English as a second language, it's this idea that we're not valuing whatever that student's first language is enough, and this positive thing that multilingualism can bring. It's seen as this detractor from being able to succeed in English class, and as if language is like pie. So if the more you speak of another language, the less English you'll know. And so this language ideology that I think is pervasive in many sectors. And it's very unfortunate because this is not the case. And it's not the case that you need to be fluent to gain a benefit from knowing another language, whether you're novice high or whether you're considered superior in the language or advanced or whatever, wherever you are on that scale. It does make a big difference if you can greet somebody in their native language and open up these barriers and doors and just saying even like these simple things. We don't see it that way, though. We see it's got to be fluency or nothing, and it has to make us money. So moving forward with language education, I think it's going to have to start with talking about the value of, again, communication, not the value of conjugating in the past tense, but really, I can communicate. And this is something really that language teachers can do. We can help people with this. We can help learn how to communicate, or relearn, I suppose, after COVID in so many ways. So this is what I hope to do going forward is really, let's shift the focus here.
Heather and I also got to talking a little bit more deeply about issues of multilingualism as they relate to national security.
Yeah, this is huge. And this is really what got me into teaching too, because I can see the need for this in the sense that we don't have enough speakers of other languages, but not just speakers, but able to interpret culture. Because we can understand everything somebody's saying to us, but if we don't understand the underlying, references to Star Wars or whatever else they're referencing, the communication it breaks down. So this is another way I think we can break down these barriers, because there is a lot of ideas that are deep set in certain mindsets that, learning another language is a liberal hobby, that it's for the elite in some ways, because you go study abroad, which is elite and elitist in many ways, especially specifically Europe. We've really got to move forward, I think, in a different way and talk about, what sub-Saharan Africa is going to be really, really important, and it still is. And we need speakers of this language, and we need not just speakers of the language, but interpreters, which means you have to understand the culture. And we see this with, for instance, interactions with China. So many Chinese are learning English, but we don't see this reciprocity in the US with learning Chinese or Russian or Arabic, or these less commonly taught languages is what they're called. And it drives me out of my mind, because it's not less commonly taught, it's just less commonly taught in the US. So Arabic and Chinese and Russian aren't like these exotic languages, certainly not to the billion speakers of Chinese. We need to start valuing this. And this is, I think, inroads to getting funding for language programs, because the Department of Defense has been what's been funding a lot of these programs. Issue, of course, being that the Department of Defense is not well-versed in education. So really it needs to be housed in education, but education is always lacking in funds. So trying to tap into like the values, and these values is a conversation, I would love to have with somebody going forward more, because we're sort of grasping at straws here.
Okay, now as most of our listeners probably know, ACTFL is the national membership organization for language educators and admin from K all the way to 16. Tell us, what is it like to be the National Language Teacher of the Year with ACTFL?
It still seems so overwhelming at some points. I just was at a conference that I would not have been able to afford to go to in New York City, when I was just sitting in Central Park, just pinching myself. I can't believe this is real. Like, what an incredible opportunity. So, and it's been great for me, because similar to our classrooms, we can't just put people together and expect them to connect. This is true for conferences too. So we see our friends that we knew previously, but we don't really make new connections. So this networking has to get better at conferences, because you can't, even language teachers, just throw them together into a room and expect them all to connect and network. It's something that I've struggled with in the past, for instance. But being the ACTFL Teacher of the Year, people are coming up to me now and just introducing themselves. And I've just had great conversations this entire past weekend in ways I haven't been able to before. And I was thinking, I need to go up to more people. I don't need to be the Teacher of the Year to do this. I don't have somehow, magically better ideas or anything like this because of this award. I'm the same person I was 2 years ago when I went to a conference and didn't speak to anybody outside of my, small friend group, So the difference is really, taking that leap and going up and introducing yourself. I heard you speak at this. I really would, can we carry on this conversation? Let's go get coffee. I can make a new friend, not just for our students, but for ourselves as well. So we can make more connections across languages, across, teaching cohorts, because like somebody said, they're like, I need to talk to more kindergarten teachers, because they have the best ideas for activities in the classroom. And it's true. When I was teaching, what I learned at Concordia Language Villages, I taught like a group of younger elementary students. The games I learned there, I still use now with my college students, and they love it. So I think for me anyways, long story short about all of this is that I could be doing a better job, reaching out to people, just like I'm saying in my classroom, like, why don't, then I've got to be a good modeler for this.
And you need to show yourself grace too, because you're only a human. That's all we are. And we're all out here doing our best. And I like the suggestion to just talk to more people, because I think even especially on podcasts, right? We have this idea that I interview you, I ask a question, you have all the answers, and it sets up this fallacy that someone else has all the answers, and we just need to talk to that one person who has the answers to the universe, and then we'll have the perfect lesson plan or the perfect mental state to approach class. And I think it's really just a matter of building community as a teacher so that you have your people to lean on. And whenever you're feeling burnt out or you're feeling uninspired, you have your people that you can lean on and, get re-energized.
I mean, it's not some kind of failure when, a lesson doesn't go well or you feel deflated or something happened with the administration, they want to cut your program. That's not on you, because like you're saying, we're all human. So being able to make these connections, like it's okay to feel sad today. It's okay to have a lesson go poorly. Take some deep breaths. Tell your students that did not go well, because they love it. They love hearing it sometimes because they want to hear, like, hey, we're all learning all the time. I was telling somebody, we talk about best practices all the time, and it has this fallacy that we're constantly then in our own classrooms upholding best practices. I'm like, no, let's talk about worst practices. What went bad this year? Like, let's learn from these too. It's an important component that I think is missing.
Heather, how can our listeners find you or connect?
Oh, this is
if you want to be connected with, of course.
Yeah, no, can you imagine if I was like, no, after all this conversation I had about connection, like, please don't get in touch. No. No, I'd love to get in conversation with anybody. If anybody wants to reach out to me, they can find me on Twitter. It's just my name, Heather Sweetser, or at UNM Sweetser, unm.edu. And they can look me up. And we're a very small community at the University of New Mexico. There's only 2 teachers here of Arabic full time. So if you just look us up on the University of New Mexico website, you'll be able to find our Arabic cohort pretty easily. So yeah, I'm happy to reach out, again, talk to anybody, because this doesn't have to be the end of the podcast, really. Let's keep going.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Heather. It was truly a joy to get to talk to you, and we really, really appreciate it in the Mango fam.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Well, there you have it. That was my conversation with ACTFL's 2022 National Teacher of the Year and University of New Mexico Senior Lecturer of Arabic, Heather Sweetser. I hope you enjoyed listening to the conversation as much as I enjoyed having it. And if you enjoyed the episode, you can let us know by following the podcast. Thanks for listening, and see you next time. Bye. This episode was hosted, produced, and edited by me, Dr. Emily Sabo. Our production manager is Dr. Erica Catregli. And our audience was... Oh, wait, that's you. Thank you so much.